Hey everybody, Terrible Dactyl here with a quick video about lips. Yes, that's right, I'm going to talk a little bit about lips, which have been a controversial topic lately in, talking about dinosaur toys and dinosaur models and things like that, especially with a lot of people talking about stuff like PNSO. I have here my PNSO Tarbosaurus, which I think is really cool. It's one of my favorite Tyrannosaur figures ever, but, a lot of people criticize PNSO because they still kind of refuse to drop the snarling teeth. When you close this thing's mouth, it's got a full complement of teeth on display. PNSO and the artists behind PNSO are firmly, they seem to be in the no lips camp, which, yes, it is still technically a little bit controversial. I know a lot of people talk about recent papers being the definitive answer to the question, but I think we're going to see this go back and forth a little bit. I'm convinced by the lips argument right now with the current evidence, but I don't want to get into all that. I just want to talk about a little bit of the history of lips in dinosaur toys, or lack of lips in dinosaur toys, specifically looking at T-Rex as an example, because there have been so many different versions of T-Rex and other Tyrannosaurs, and they usually show these big complement of teeth. But the reason I wanted to bring this up today is because I recently got a new, I don't know if I should even call it a variant or version of this Carnegie Collection T-Rex. It's really more of a mold mistake, but ironically, the minute I got it in my hands and I was looking at it, I thought, wow, this is a really good example of what a Carnegie sculpted by Forrest Rogers, T-Rex would look like if they had decided to go full on and give it lips. I'm going to show you guys that at the end of the video, but for right now, let's take a look back at some previous T-Rex figures. This is the very first T-Rex figure I ever owned. It was one of the first dinosaur figures I ever had. This is the Bullyland 1985 T-Rex, and you can see it's got its mouth shut. Rare for a T-Rex figure. Its mouth is shut. You can see teeth, but it kind of looks like it has lips. I mean, if I were going to put this in the lip or no lip, I would probably count this as lips because you can see the teeth on this tiny little rubbery thing, but they're kind of just there. Early T-Rex, I mean, up until Jurassic Park really is what caused this whole lip thing to start, because they gave it no lips, or at least teeth hanging out of the mouth while it was shut. If you look at even earlier T-Rexes, like my Invicta T-Rex here, it's once again kind of got that snarling look to it, almost like it's got mobile, like almost mammalian lips, where the lips are just parted at the tip of the mouth, like it's smiling. Lipped was kind of the default up until Jurassic Park. If you look at old paleo art, even 80s, Bob Bacher, Greg Paul type paleo art, which a lot of people, for some reason, kind of have it in their memory as not having lips. They usually do, at least to some degree. And then Jurassic Park really came along in 1993 and popularized the whole no-lip, snaggletooth look of T-Rex. But oddly enough, despite starting in the late 80s, the Carnegie Collection dinosaurs, I want to say T-Rex, dinosaurs in general, never really had lips. This is an early model of the Carnegie T-Rex, and you can see that even though the teeth are not separately sculpted, they are on sort of a little separately sculpted, detailed, raised ridge, which are definitely underneath the jaws. You can see they poke significantly out from the soft tissue, and if you imagine this thing with its mouth shut, they'd probably overhang sort of like the Jurassic Park T-Rex. This is definitely a non-lipped model of a T-Rex, and all the Carnegie dinosaurs are like that. Even the herbivores. Here's an Apatosaurus 1989 edition with its mouth shut, and you can see that full little complement of those long peg-like teeth in the front of the jaws, despite the fact that the mouth is fully shut. Then by the time we get to the early 90s, we had things like the Batat T-Rex, which is still probably my number one T-Rex model, even though it's slightly inaccurate now. I think it's just beautifully sculpted, but anyway. This is the original Batat T-Rex, the version 1, and you can see it's really got that sort of Jurassic Park style head. It does have a little bit of extra soft tissue compared to the JP T-Rex or other sort of inspired models that people copied off of the JP T-Rex. There's a decent amount of soft tissue in the mouth, but it's looking like probably a no-lip situation here. If theropod dinosaurs like T-Rex did have lips, it probably would have been more varanid-like. For example, like if you look at a Komodo dragon, even when the mouth is open, it's hard to see the teeth. And some modern companies are starting to get the hang of this type of If you look at the Kiss T-Rex by Rebor of all companies, they got a really good job of doing the soft tissue on that mouth. Some other modern companies are kind of getting there too. But even going forward into the early 2000s, Carnegie was doing the same basic style as Batat did. In fact, this is very, very similar down to the tooth arrangement to the Batat T-Rex. You can see the similarity. This is the 10th anniversary Carnegie T-Rex versus Batat. Can I get them both in here? The way that the mouths are done, very, very similar. The T-Rex skull is a little bit more narrow than the Batat, but you can see that the lack of lips is pretty much the same. Once again, you've got a little bit of extra soft tissue around the gums, making it look a little bit more realistic. The teeth are individually sculpted, unlike the very early Carnegie T-Rexes. And it's got a little bit more of this oral tissue in the back, almost like a little cheek. It's very bird-like. I've always been very impressed with the way that Forrest Rogers sculpted this T-Rex. It doesn't just have that like pink inner jaw thing. It's kind of like all one piece of tissue that creates this sort of stretched out rictus here. It's very similar to birds. If you look at birds with featherless heads, like vultures or condors, if their mouths are open, this is what they look like. So that's a very cool detail. Unfortunately, this classic 10th anniversary Carnegie T-Rex had a lot of problems. Forrest Rogers has even talked about this in interviews with Prehistoric Times. There were a lot of mold problems. She actually got on top of Carnegie and Safari because it was kind of giving her model a bad name, I guess. It's a really nice model. I think if it weren't for some of these problems that are very common in this figure, it would be, in my opinion, the best of the Carnegie T-Rexes, and even still one of the best T-Rexes made to this day. If you can get it to stand upright, sometimes the feet get a little warped. This is an early edition of the model. I think this one is probably, you can tell by like the red stripe and some of the mold problems, that this is one that was made in 1998 or 1999. The head is a little lopsided. The two different sides of the mold are asymmetrical. This really became a pronounced problem later. It had warped feet, deformities in the mold. It really was just a mess, to the point that Safari wound up remolding this several times. Unfortunately, some of those made the problem even worse. If you look at my website, dinosaurmountain.net, you can see that there are some editions of this where it looks like clearly that something, either the mold or the original prototype, where the snout had broken and the people at the factory had to kind of, I don't know, glue it back together when they made the mold, or repair the mold in a way that just really made it look completely wonky. And they really had trouble getting this model right up until the late 2000s. After about 2012, the last version of the mold for this figure was actually really, really good. And if you can find a later edition of this mold on eBay, you can tell because they're a much lighter brown color. They're much more uniform. They don't have these little markings and things on them. And the mold just looks really good. The feet have been fixed. The face has been fixed. It's really stable. And they got it perfect for a couple of years, it seems like, because, like I said, this T-Rex that I just got in the mail the other day, take a look at this. This is probably the last Safari 10th anniversary T-Rex from Carnegie to ever be produced. It's got that uniform brown color that indicates it's from a later production run, one of the last production runs after 2012. The other way you can tell that is by looking at the imprint on the belly. It's got a completely revised imprint. It's got 3 lines. It says Carnegie Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then it's got the scale 135. The older ones did not have that. The older ones had a 4-line stamp with the item number, and it just says Tyrannosaurus, copyright 1998, the Carnegie. So they revised the entire mold. They revised the stamp. This one actually stands up on its own, stands up very well. The mold has been fixed in the feet and in the head. If you look, the skull is now symmetrical on both sides. I really love this model. Between the color and the symmetry, it really looks like something, not in terms of accuracy, but some of the old school 80s depictions of T-Rex that I grew up. I remember there was a particular model that was made that was featured in some documentaries and books back in the 80s and early 90s, where Bob Bacher and other paleontologists would show up the binocular vision of T-Rex, and this one really matches up well with those old models. and it just is a really beautiful sculpt. It retains that nice bird-like finish to the back of the mouth. But if you notice, something that's very different about this version of T-Rex compared to the older one is the teeth. So where are the teeth on this model? When I first saw this pop up online, I'm like, well, it looks like it's got some play wear, right? It looks like it's got a little bit of paint wear here at the front. Probably somebody was playing with this thing and scraping it against stuff like rocks or other dinosaur figures, and the teeth were worn off. But if you look closely, that is not the case, because the paint on the inside of the mouth is pristine and the teeth are all still individually painted. There are no scuffs of any kind on the inside of this mouth. Look at that. You can just barely see those nubs of teeth, which whoever at the factory was like, well, this is the way it came out of the mold. We are still going to paint it. We're going to do our best. We're going to detail this thing. And some of the teeth remain, especially on this side by the tongue, the ones that are kind of molded very close to the edge of the tongue, poking out, this long one here poking out. But the overall impression you get from this figure is actually of a lipped T-Rex. This is what a lipped T-Rex should look like. Maybe a couple longer teeth poking out. Some are bigger or smaller, but mostly kind of embedded in that internal oral soft tissue on the inside of the gums and the palate, the roof of the mouth. And despite the fact that they're not really pointy, which is, you know, it's a problem because this is a mold defect, it looks really good. If Safari were going to make a T-Rex with lips, this is kind of the way it should look. It looks really like a Varnid mouth, the way that the teeth are only semi-visible, even with the mouth opened. And despite the fact that if it really had lips and, you know, the teeth are missing here, they should be extending down a little bit, like, you know, a millimeter, half a millimeter below where they are. So it kind of gives the illusion of a too narrow skull now. But I feel like that's nitpicking. Overall, the reason I wound up buying this one is not only is it the revised mold, but clearly they spent so much work revising this mold, and then what happened is it must have instantly, almost instantly, within a couple of years, gotten screwed up again. Because this is not an intentional change, let me be clear. This is a mold problem. You can see that these teeth have been broken off inside the mold, or those little teeny tiny bits of plastic cool too fast in the mold. They get stuck in there. So when they do another run of the model through the tooling, the plastic does not fill into those gaps. The gaps have been essentially plugged by old plastic. And when you pull it out of the mold, most of the teeth are just not present. They have not been molded correctly. Coincidentally, this creates what we would consider today, from a 2023 perspective, kind of a more accurate T-Rex model, but it is a mold defect. And if you look at the bottom, not the stamp, it's hard to see because the feet are a little scuffed up here, but there is a number, a manufacturing date number here, which says 12/14. So that's the date that this production run was produced. In December 2014. They produced this run from the old 1998 mold of the 10th anniversary T-Rex. It was originally released in 1999, but it was sculpted and molded in 1998, which is why that's on the imprint stamp on the belly. The Carnegie Collection was discontinued in 2015, and I have to assume that these mold problems with this figure kept cropping up. They had already introduced the newer T-Rex the year before, the completely resculpted T-Rex, once again without lips. I have to assume that this would have probably been it. Once they looked at the molds getting pulled from the tooling, that we're looking like there's no teeth on this T-Rex, that is not going to fly. I have to assume that this model would have been retired at that point had the Carnegie Collection continued on. They probably would have just said, you know what, it's had a good run. Let's retire this. We've already got the new T-Rex in circulation. They were still producing the old T-Rex with the revised head at that time, so they still would have had two T-Rexes on the market. They probably would have said, enough is enough. This mold is not salvageable anymore. We're not going to pour any more money into it, especially now that we've got a remake. Just kill it. But this is, as it turns out, probably one of the last Carnegie figures to ever be physically produced, because it was produced in December of 2014, right before the line ended. Safari did not renew their license with the Carnegie, and so it wasn't worthwhile to retool this mold again to fix the teeth or to just retire it if that had been in the cards. They wound up accidentally producing what I guess by mistake is one of the more accurate T-Rexes that you can get. I haven't, not that I've really been looking, but I haven't seen too many T-Rexes with this mold defect. I have heard some people talk about online having or finding T-Rexes, the Anniversary Rex, that lack teeth or that has something screwed up with the face. I'm guessing they're talking about this model. It's probably a relative rarity because, like I said, they would have retooled or retired this mold shortly after they caught this starting to happen. So I can't imagine that more than one production run of this figure was ever made, and who knows when in the production run this particular defect started to happen. But if you can find one, or if you already have one, I would, take care of it. Keep it in your collection. I think it really holds up compared to all the other T-Rexes that have been made, and particularly from the Carnegie Collection. Even though it's a mistake, having kind of a lipped variant of such a great, cool-looking T-Rex, modern-day looking pose, very nice blended coloration on this one. Sculpting still holds up. I personally still prefer this to the updated 2014 T-Rex. Not my favorite figure, but this one I think is, honestly, even though it's a mistake, probably the best Carnegie T-Rex that you can get, and still one of the only quote-unquote lipped, scientifically accurate T-Rexes that you're going to be able to find. So there you have it. Carnegie, right at the last minute, accidentally produced one of the first and best looking modern lipped theropods. Until next time, this has been Terrible Dactyl. Make sure you check out my website, dinosaurmountain.com, for a comparison of all the different Carnegie variants and photos of all the ones that I've been able to find. And if you have ones that are not on the website, please let me know. Drop me a message, send me an email. I will give you credit. We'll get those added. Until next time, everybody.